My parents gave my sister a $240,000 trust fund, and all I got was an empty chair. I have worked hard for everything in my life. Nothing ever came easy, but I pushed through. I juggled jobs, paid bills late, and stayed up at night worrying about the future. My sister Harper never had to worry about any of that. She was always the favorite, pampered, and spoiled since she was little. My mom, Elaine, treated her like the most precious thing in the world, while my dad, Thomas, just went along with it and never stood up for me. I tried not to compare myself to Harper, but one moment made it impossible. I had been saving and struggling for graduate school, and I finally asked my parents for a small loan to cover one semester. I thought maybe, just this once, they'd be proud of how hard I'd worked and help me take the next step. I sat at the table, papers spread out, explaining how I would pay everything back. Mom didn't even look moved. Dad kept his eyes down, quiet as always. And then Mom told me the truth I wasn't prepared for. There wasn't any money for me. Not because they couldn't afford it, but because every last cent had already been set aside for Harper. Her words hit me harder than anything I'd ever heard. We saved everything for Harper's future. You're strong enough on your own. I sat there stunned. Strong enough on my own? That wasn't encouragement, it was dismissal. It was them telling me I didn't matter as much. My sister had a fortune waiting for her, while I was being told to keep fighting alone, as if my struggles didn't deserve the same care or support. I left the table that day with my chest heavy and my throat tight, trying not to let them see me break. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what it meant. They had chosen her. They had always chosen her. The trust fund wasn't just dollars in a bank account. It was proof of love and loyalty, divided unfairly. Later that night, I stared at myself in the mirror and thought about everything I had carried on my own. I thought about Harper showing off her designer clothes and bragging about her trips, never worrying about how she'd pay for anything. She would never know the feeling of begging for help and being told no. She would never know the pain of being told she wasn't worth investing in. I realized then that an empty chair would have been kinder. At least then my place in the family would be clear. Instead, I was forced to sit at the table and watch them give everything to her, while leaving me with nothing but words about being strong. That was the moment something in me shifted. I couldn't see them the same way again. I worked job after job, barely sleeping some weeks. The money I made went straight to rent, groceries, and paying off the mountain of debt I carried. There was never anything left over for myself. I learned to give up on things I once dreamed of, like traveling or going back to school. Every time I thought I was getting ahead, another bill came in, and I had to start all over again. My parents never seemed to notice how much I struggled. Instead, they used me as some kind of measuring stick for Harper, but not in a way that made me feel valued. They would say things like, "Look how hard your sister works, Harper. You should be more like her." But it didn't come from pride. It was said as though my hard work meant nothing compared to the perfect image they held of her. The comparisons didn't make Harper respect me. They just reminded me I wasn't truly seen. Harper's life was a sharp contrast to mine. She always had new clothes, the kind with brand names I couldn't even dream of buying. She went on vacations every year, sometimes more than once, posting pictures of beaches and cities I'd only seen in magazines. When she turned 21, my parents surprised her with a car, shiny and new, sitting in the driveway with a bow on it. I was still taking the bus and walking in the rain. I swallowed the bitterness because saying anything would have sounded like jealousy. That wasn't who I wanted to be. I kept my distance instead. When family dinners happened, I sat quiet while Harper talked about shopping trips or parties. I clapped along with everyone else when she announced her next adventure. On the outside, I tried to look supportive, but inside, every word was a small cut I couldn't ignore. It was confusing because I did love her. She was my sister, and there were memories of us as kids, laughing together before everything between us grew uneven. Part of me wanted to protect that bond, to believe none of it was her fault. But the favoritism built a wall I couldn't climb. Every new gift she received, every time my parents praised her while ignoring me, the wall got higher. I told myself to be strong, to stay focused on my own path. Still, the resentment sat heavy in my chest, silent but always there. I learned to smile when I wanted to cry, to nod when I wanted to scream. I carried my hurt quietly, because I knew if I ever let it out, I might not be able to stop. Even when I kept my distance, the wound never healed. I could love my sister and still feel the sting of knowing she had been handed everything while I was left to fight for scraps. That contradiction lived inside me every single day, and it only grew sharper the more I tried to bury it. Harper announced her engagement at a family dinner one evening, her smile bright and her hand stretched out so everyone could see the large diamond on her finger. She had barely sat down before she started talking about Ethan McAllister, her fiancé, a young lawyer who already seemed to have everything lined up for success. My parents' faces glowed with pride, and I could almost see the future they imagined for her, grand, polished, and far above anything I had ever been offered. Almost immediately, the conversation turned to the wedding. My mom pulled out a notebook and started scribbling ideas, and my dad promised they would make it the best day of Harper's life. I sat there quietly while they tossed around talk of ballrooms, catering, flowers, and designer dresses. I didn't need to ask where the money would come from. I already knew. Part of Harper's trust would be poured into the wedding, making sure she had the kind of celebration people would talk about for years. When the plans started to grow even bigger, my mom turned to me and said, "We just need you to be a supportive sister." The words stung, though I forced a smile. A supportive sister, nothing more. I wasn't asked to help make decisions, wasn't invited to be part of the planning, not even considered for a role beyond clapping for her and standing in the background. Harper didn't notice my silence. She went on and on about her ring, her dress fittings, the venue she had her eye on, and how she and Ethan were already being called the perfect couple by his friends. Every detail she shared sounded like a reminder of what I would never have. She said it all with such excitement, but the way she looked at me made it feel like she knew exactly how much it hurt. I nodded, I listened, I congratulated her. But inside I felt the salt burning into a wound that never seemed to close. I was happy for her in a distant way, but mostly I was tired of watching her life be showered with gifts and applause while mine was treated like it barely existed. Through it all, I couldn't ignore Ethan. He was polite, friendly, the type of man who seemed careful with his words. But more than once I caught his eyes on me, not in a way that felt wrong, but in a way that made me wonder what he was thinking. He watched me as if I was a puzzle he wanted to figure out, as if he could sense there was more behind my quiet smile than anyone else cared to see. I looked away each time, unsure of what his interest meant, unsure if I even wanted to know. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that he noticed me in ways Harper never did, and that unsettled me more than anything else that night. At another family dinner, Harper brought out a stack of papers and laid them neatly on the table. She said she had finished the seating chart for her wedding and wanted everyone to see how perfect it looked. Mom leaned in close, excited, while Dad nodded along as if the whole thing were already a masterpiece. I sat quietly, waiting for my name, telling myself not to expect too much. Harper read off the list like it was an award ceremony. Her friends, her fiancé's colleagues, her bridesmaids, and of course, the table right in front for the immediate family. She smiled as she described the decorations for that table, saying it would be the heart of the reception. My parents beamed, pleased to imagine themselves sitting front and center. When I finally spotted my name, I felt my stomach sink. It wasn't anywhere near the family table. Instead, I was listed as family guest and placed all the way in the back. I thought at first it had to be a mistake, some kind of oversight, but when I asked Harper about it, she simply shrugged and said the front table was already full. That alone would have been enough to sting, but then I noticed something else on the chart. Right at the front, next to my parents, was an empty seat. Harper explained that it was for appearances, in case anyone important showed up late or if the photographer needed the table to look even. My chest tightened as I realized the truth. My family would rather leave a chair empty than have me sitting with them. The room around me grew blurry as Harper continued chatting about centerpieces and flowers. Mom didn't even glance my way, too busy agreeing with every little detail. Dad stayed silent, as if the decision about the seating chart had nothing to do with him. No one seemed to notice that I had gone quiet, staring at the paper as if it had spelled out what I had always feared. To them, I wasn't really family. I was an afterthought, someone to be tucked away where I wouldn't disturb the picture they wanted to show the world. That empty chair was the perfect symbol of what I meant to them. Disposable, replaceable, easier to erase than to acknowledge. I held myself together through the rest of dinner, forcing a smile, nodding when Harper looked in my direction, pretending I didn't care. But when I finally got home, the mask broke. I closed the door and cried until I couldn't breathe. I thought about all the times I had swallowed my hurt, all the times I had stayed quiet, hoping things would change. That night I promised myself I was done being humiliated. If they wanted me in the shadows, fine. But I wouldn't keep standing there while they pushed me down again and again. Something in me hardened. I couldn't let them keep defining my worth with an empty chair. One afternoon, I found myself sitting with Ethan while Harper was busy on the phone. He spoke casually at first, asking about my work and how I managed to balance so many things at once. I answered honestly, not thinking much of it, but then his expression changed. Almost like he forgot himself, he sighed and said something I didn't expect. He admitted Harper could be difficult, that she always wanted things her way, and that sometimes it felt exhausting. The words came out quickly before he caught himself, glancing at me as if he'd already said too much. I didn't respond right away, but inside I felt a shift. It was the first time I'd heard anyone close to Harper hint at what I had always known, that beneath her polished image, she was spoiled, demanding, and used to everything being handed to her. It made me realize Ethan wasn't as blind as I thought. He might not be as committed to the picture-perfect future Harper believed they were building. Later that evening, Harper turned her attention to me in front of Ethan. She laughed about how I was still single, still struggling with bills and long hours, and she said it in that tone that wasn't playful but sharp enough to sting. She liked to act like it was all harmless fun, but every word felt like a reminder of where she thought I belonged, beneath her. I forced a smile, though my cheeks burned, but when I glanced at Ethan, I caught something in his face. He wasn't laughing with her. His eyes were on me, steady and thoughtful, as if he saw something Harper didn't. It wasn't pity. It was something else, respect, maybe even admiration. He asked me another question, this time about how I had managed to pay for my education without family help. I explained simply, telling him about late nights and endless work shifts. Harper rolled her eyes, brushing it off like it wasn't worth mentioning, but Ethan didn't look away. He listened. He seemed genuinely interested, almost impressed. The contrast between the two of them couldn't have been clearer in that moment. Harper loved to flaunt what she had, the things bought for her, the easy life carved out with money that was never earned. I had never thought anyone would see value in my struggles, but Ethan did. He seemed to notice the difference between someone who expected the world to bend and someone who fought for every step. I stayed quiet, not wanting to encourage whatever thoughts he might be having, but I could feel the air shifting. Harper kept talking, oblivious, bragging about her next shopping trip and how Ethan was lucky to marry someone who knew exactly what she wanted. But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't as certain anymore. In that silence, a seed was planted. Harper's perfect world, the one she paraded in front of everyone, suddenly didn't look so unshakable. And for the first time, I wondered if Ethan was starting to see the cracks. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with non-stop talk about flowers, menus, and dresses. Every time I visited, the house was covered in wedding magazines and checklists taped to the fridge. My parents moved around as if nothing else in the world mattered. Mom spent hours making calls, comparing decorations, while Dad just nodded and agreed with whatever Harper wanted. Whenever I tried to join a conversation, my words went unheard. It was like I wasn't even there. One evening, I was walking past Harper's room when I heard her voice. She was laughing with one of her friends on the phone. At first, I tried not to listen, but then I caught my own name. Harper said I was the family embarrassment, the sister who worked too much, dressed too plain, and didn't belong in the spotlight. The words stung deeper than I wanted to admit. I pressed my back against the wall, holding my breath, waiting for the laughter to stop. When it did, I slipped away, my heart heavy. Not long after, I found myself in the kitchen with Harper and Ethan. She was complaining about the cake, saying it wasn't elegant enough. She turned her irritation toward me, muttering about how I probably couldn't even tell the difference between cheap and expensive. Before I could respond, Ethan spoke up. His voice was calm but firm as he said, "I think Delaney has better taste than you give her credit for." The room went silent. Harper's face tightened, her smile slipping into something colder. She quickly changed the subject, but I could see the anger in her eyes. She didn't like anyone standing up for me, least of all her fiancé. I wanted to thank him, but I stayed quiet. It was safer that way. The more time passed, the more I wondered if I should even go to the wedding. Every part of it screamed that I didn't belong. The seating chart still haunted me, and Harper's cruel words replayed in my head. A part of me thought walking away would be easier, that no one would miss me if I didn't show up. But then another thought crept in. Maybe going wasn't about supporting her. Maybe it was about me, proving to myself that I wasn't afraid to face their rejection anymore. I had spent too long hiding my hurt, letting them treat me like a shadow. If I didn't go, it would feel like letting them win, like admitting they were right about me being less. So I made my choice. I would attend the wedding, not for Harper, not for my parents, but for myself. I would walk into that room, sit in my place, and hold my head high. Even if they ignored me, even if Harper tried to tear me down again, I would be there on my own terms. For once, it wouldn't be about them. It would be about me refusing to disappear. The night before the wedding, the house was in chaos. Vendors came and went, each one carrying flowers, boxes, or last-minute decorations. Harper was in the middle of it all, shouting orders like a general. Nothing was good enough for her. She hated the flowers, complained about the food, and even screamed at the photographer for being too slow. Ethan tried to calm her down, but she snapped at him too, saying he didn't understand how important this day was. Her voice was sharp, high, and full of rage. Guests who had arrived early shifted uncomfortably in the living room, pretending not to hear, though her shouting carried through every wall. I stood in the hallway, not surprised, just tired. I had seen Harper lose her temper plenty of times, but never like this. Finally, Ethan's patience broke. His face tightened, and he told her to stop embarrassing herself. That only fueled her anger, and she stormed off in a fit, slamming the door so hard the whole house seemed to shake. Ethan stood there, breathing heavily, running a hand through his hair. When his eyes found mine, it was as though he'd been waiting for someone to witness it. Later that night, he found me on the porch, where I had gone to get some air. He sat down beside me, quiet at first. Then he let out a long breath and admitted he wasn't sure about any of this. He said Harper wanted everything her way, all the time, and he was beginning to wonder what their life together would really look like. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent. Part of me wanted to tell him to run, to leave before it was too late. But I knew those weren't my words to give. Even without my voice, my silence said enough. He looked at me like he understood exactly what I was thinking. There was no need for me to encourage him. He already knew. As the night stretched on, Harper reappeared, this time unsteady on her feet. She had been drinking, and it showed. Her laughter was loud and forced, her words slurred. At first, she focused on telling everyone how perfect tomorrow would be, how lucky she was, how everything was going exactly as planned. Then her eyes landed on me. With a cruel little smirk, she raised her glass and said, "And then there's Delaney, the mistaked child." The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. A few guests gasped quietly, and others lowered their eyes, pretending they hadn't heard. My parents froze, neither defending me nor scolding her. Ethan looked horrified, staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. I didn't respond. I just stood there, holding myself together while my chest ached. That moment was worse than being left off the family table. She had said out loud what I had always felt, and she didn't care who heard it. Something in me hardened even more that night. Tomorrow would come, and I would walk into it with every wound exposed. But I also knew Harper had revealed herself, and Ethan had seen it too. That truth would linger long after the wedding flowers wilted. The wedding day came with bright lights and polished smiles. The venue was decorated like a scene from a magazine, with tall flowers standing in every corner and golden chairs shining under chandeliers. Guests arrived in expensive clothes, hugging my parents and praising Harper as if she were royalty. My mother walked around with her head high, proud of every detail. My father stayed close to her, nodding at everything she said. They looked as if this day was the crown jewel of their lives. I slipped into the back row, unnoticed, just as I expected. The music swelled, and everyone turned toward Harper as she entered the room in her gown. She was glowing, every eye fixed on her as she walked slowly down the aisle. People whispered about how beautiful she looked, how perfect the couple seemed together. I sat still, my hands folded, waiting for the moment to pass. The ceremony began with the usual words, promises of love and forever. The priest spoke, Harper smiled, and my parents beamed. Everything seemed to move smoothly, but when the vows reached Ethan, the air changed. He took the paper in his hands, but his voice faltered. The room went quiet, waiting for him to continue, but the silence stretched too long. At first, people thought it was nerves. A few guests chuckled softly, trying to brush it off, but when Ethan still didn't speak, the laughter faded. Whispers started from one row to another, spreading quickly. I could see the confusion on Harper's face, her smile slipping as she turned to look at him. He cleared his throat, tried again, but the words wouldn't come out right. His eyes moved across the crowd, almost searching for something or someone. That was when his gaze landed on me. For one still moment, the room disappeared, and it felt like only the two of us existed. I didn't move, didn't breathe, but my eyes held his. I could see the doubt written all over his face, the weight of a decision he wasn't sure he wanted to make. My heart pounded in my chest, but I stayed calm, giving nothing away. Yet I knew that by meeting his eyes, I had told him everything he needed to know. That I understood. That I saw what no one else wanted to see. Around us, the whispers grew louder. Guests leaned toward each other, wondering what was wrong. Some shifted in their seats, uneasy, while others stared openly at Harper, waiting for her reaction. She clutched Ethan's arm, urging him to go on, but his hesitation had already been noticed by everyone. Sitting in the back, I felt the air crack with tension. For once, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the forgotten one, the family guest in the shadows. All eyes were on Ethan, but in his silence, I knew the truth. This day wasn't going the way Harper had planned. And she knew it too. The room froze when the priest asked Ethan the final question. All eyes were on him, waiting for the simple words everyone expected to hear. But instead of saying them, he shook his head slowly. His voice was steady, but his answer cut through the silence like a knife. I can't, he said. The sound of gasps filled the air, followed by the scraping of chairs as people leaned forward. Harper's face went pale, her lips parted as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. A moment later, she collapsed onto the floor of the altar, her dress spreading out like a broken wave around her. My mother rushed toward her, kneeling beside her, whispering frantically. My father stood stiff, trying to calm the room with his hands raised, as if he could somehow erase what had just happened. But the guests were already whispering loudly, their voices carrying across the hall. Some tried to hide their shock, but most didn't bother. They stared openly, eager for the scandal to unfold. Ethan stood firm, his eyes moving slowly over the crowd before returning to Harper. His words were clear, leaving no space for confusion. I can't marry someone who thinks only of herself. You're selfish, spoiled, and I realize now this isn't the life I want. His voice didn't rise, but it carried strong enough for every guest to hear. The whispers turned into a wave, rising and falling as people repeated his words. Harper pushed herself up, her face red and streaked with makeup. She pointed at me with shaking hands, her voice sharp and furious. This is your fault. You stole him from me. Every head turned toward me at once. I felt the heat of their eyes, the weight of their judgment, but I stayed calm. I stood slowly, my chair sliding back against the floor, and looked straight at Harper. My voice was steady, quiet enough to feel personal, but loud enough for everyone to hear. I never stole anything from you. I've always been on the outside, and all of you made sure I knew it. Today just proved it. The room went silent again, the weight of my words settling over the guests. Harper's rage burned in her eyes, but she had nothing left to say. Ethan looked at me, his face unreadable, while my parents clung to Harper as if they could protect her from the truth. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I didn't run. I simply stood there, calm in the middle of the storm, while the wedding unraveled around us. The day that was supposed to show Harper's perfect life had fallen apart, and for once, it wasn't me who felt like the embarrassment. It was her. The wedding never recovered after Ethan's refusal. Guests began leaving in small groups, whispering as they went, shaking their heads at the disaster they had just witnessed. The hall that had been decorated so perfectly now felt cold and empty, like the joy had been ripped out of it. The music stopped, the food sat untouched, and the money poured into every detail no longer meant anything. My parents stood near the altar, trying to keep order, but their red faces showed what they really felt, humiliation. Harper refused to leave the stage at first. She sat there crying, her dress wrinkled, her hair falling out of place. She begged Ethan to change his mind, but he walked away without looking back. For all the months of planning, for all the trust fund money spent to make the day shine, she was left with nothing but stares from people who now pitied her. Mom tried to console her, whispering that everything would be fine, while Dad kept apologizing to the guests, his voice low and rushed. No one believed him. The truth was plain to see. The golden image they had built around Harper had cracked wide open in front of everyone. Their favorite child had been abandoned at the altar, and there was no way to cover it up. I didn't move to help her. I didn't smile or smirk either. I simply stood there, calm, watching the scene play out. For once, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I wasn't the one being pushed aside. Harper's perfect world had collapsed, and I didn't have to lift a finger. When it became clear the ceremony was over, I quietly made my way out. No one stopped me, no one asked me to stay. My parents were too busy trying to shield Harper from the shame, though nothing they said could erase what had happened. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face, and a strange peace washed over me. I realized I didn't need their approval, their money, or their love measured in trust funds and empty chairs. I had carried myself this far without them, and I could keep going. Behind me, Harper still had her fortune, but it couldn't buy back Ethan or the respect she had lost. All that remained was a ruined wedding and whispers that would follow her for years. I walked away with nothing in my hands, but dignity in my heart. For the first time, that felt like enough. Do you think Ethan made the right choice by walking away from Harper and her family? Or should he have stayed and tried to make it work? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinion.